Hey guys, thanks for coming back. We are currently reading Alan Watts' Eastern Wisdom, Modern Life. It's a compilation of talks that he gave in the 60s. And in today's episode, we're going to look at chapter 2, which is about Mahayana Buddhism. And I'm going to try, as always, to summarize what's being said in a short while. As we pointed out in the first chapter last time, Buddhism can be regarded as a means to, change people's consciousness, as a means to awaken people. And the question then is, to awaken from what? And Alan Watts puts it that, primarily Buddhism aims to awaken people of two types of illusions. And those are illusions of fixed thought, of having fixed thought, or, habits. And one of the illusions is the belief that the world basically is made out of stuff, that it's composed of, substantial things. And Mahayana Buddhism, in contrast, posits that, the universe basically is made up of mind. The idea that our world of experience is merely the perception of patterns, of processes that can arise within mind, and that there is basically nothing substantial or material, underlying these perceptions. So, of course, you find this mirrored in modern science, in quantum physics to be exact. Quantum physics challenges the notion, or the classical notion of there being solid, substantial and determined building blocks that make up the universe. And it introduces a different and more sort of probabilistic description of the universe, of the fundamental nature of reality. And what it suggests is that at the quantum level, at which we would, think we would find fundamental building blocks that have substance, the fundamental constituents that we find in quantum physics are quite different from classical particles. So, in Buddhist terms, to cut this short, the fundamental constituents of reality are mind-based, or our mind. So this first illusion needs to be overcome, that it's actually, we need to overcome the illusion of materialism, according to Buddhism. The second illusion that, according to Buddhism, we need to overcome is the concept of ourselves as solid and, separately existing egos. And by ego, we mean some kind of permanent identity, permanent center of consciousness that is located in our body somewhere, that is doing the thinking, doing the feeling the feeling, having the emotions, and so on. And if you think about this from a Buddhist perspective, then you would say, merely say there is experience, but there's no experiencer behind the experience. There's no one having the thoughts. There's no one having the experience. So in Buddhism, as I probably said in the last chapter, when we discussed the last chapter, there is no, you cannot differentiate between an experiencer, the experiencing, and the experience. Essentially, ultimately, they're all one. it's all one process, it's all one flow. And as Alan Watts puts it, we are that process. If you want to conceive of a we or a you or I, you would have to liken that to the process itself. So he says the self is the actual process of sensation, and there isn't a sensor behind sensation. If you look at this a little bit more closely and start asking yourself, well, how or why does this feeling of I, or this feeling of our having a center, of consciousness, how does this even arise? Why does it occur in the first place? And the thing is, apparently, that our nervous system is able to store impressions of former states that we had. So the storing of these impressions leads to the nervous system having feedback loops with itself, if you want, and that's what we generally would call memory in human terms. And this being so, this enables metacognition. So that means that if you take human being as a system, the human being is able to have sensations, store the impressions of those sensations, and sort of refer back to itself. So the system is able to refer back to itself and look upon these feedback loops, if you will, from almost like a helicopter perspective. And that is actually according to I guess Buddhism, but not only Buddhism, that is how the ego, or the sensation of there being a rather solid seeming and solid over time seeming center of consciousness. I'm going to read you a quick quote from Alan Watts himself from that chapter. And so a similar illusion arises from the repetitive pattern of the nervous system and gives us the impression that there is this constant thing, the experiencer, who lasts and endures like a substance from the past through the present and into the future. What happens is not only that there is metacognition, so not only does the system sort of enter into these feedback loops and construct this sense of ego, what happens furthermore down the line is that human beings tend to identify themselves with that ego. And I think we need to differentiate that, it's because that's quite important when you, I guess, want to try and reverse that process. So the first thing is to realize that the ego is sort of like a byproduct of sensory perception, that there is a tendency, or since there is the ability to metacognize, there is a tendency to uphold that impression of a ego. But then there is also the tendency for us to sort of latch on to that, and to identify with that notion of ego. And I would personally call this, for reference sake, ego consciousness. It's you can regard it as almost like a possible form of consciousness that human beings are capable of, having, or a sort of state of mind that we are able to have. And I might point out here that this resembles a great deal the subject matter that we've been discussing when we did the last book review of The Ending of Time. Krishnamurti referred to this just in other words, but he sort of referred to, I guess, he pointed to the same mechanism many times. So if you think about this for a while, that this is, according to Buddhism, this is so, that we falsely or mistakenly identify with something that is just sort of arising out of the way we, process sensory data. If you just accept this as a sort of hypothesis, you start to see how terribly limited the majority of human beings live their lives and have lived their lives for, I guess, a good part of human evolution. And if our ego, if you regard ego as the center of our being and also the epicenter of our acting in the world, we're prone to live a life of sort of endless pursuit. We tend to do what's good for ourselves. We tend to start dividing between self and other. We therefore tend to enter into conflict with others. So division and conflict are sort of like a natural consequence, of ego consciousness, or can be a natural consequence of ego consciousness. And of course, there is this whole counter movement, or there always probably has been this whole counter movement of trying to get out of ego consciousness. If we leave aside religion, all types of religions, that, in my personal opinion, are merely projections of self onto, some other entity outside of yourself. If you leave all the religions aside, and you could probably reproach a lot of Western Buddhist practitioners with, that they're merely trying to get out of their ego, by practicing Buddhism. Because that's certainly part of the appeal that Buddhism has to Western people, is the idea of sort of deliverance from this vicious circle, that we entered into when we first, clung to this idea of ego, and then also tried, and also tended to identify ourselves with it. So you could reproach a lot of Buddhist practitioners probably with that, is that, the only reason why you're practicing Buddhism is because you seek to get out of that sort of ego consciousness. And what Alan Watts says, and he's not alone in this, is that by trying to sort of get rid of the idea of ego, or trying to get rid of the idea of ego, is as valuable as believing in the existence of an ego in the first place. Because when you do try to get rid of something, you sort of implicitly acknowledge that it's there. There's something to be gotten rid of. So maybe that's just a technicality, but I think it's worth thinking about. If we go further, or if we sort of take all this information in, not before long we come up, we come upon the description of the Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva is a person who, in Alan Watts' words, is no longer seeking to escape from life, but has realized that it isn't something to escape from. So the ideal sort of person in Mahayana Buddhism is not at all detached from life. The ideal is not to be a monk sitting somewhere in a cave by yourself, for the rest of your life. Rather, it's to accept life completely and also be in, life, be embedded in life, and whatever life might be at the time in your culture. So the last sort of Buddhist concept that Alan Watts covers in his chapter, or in his speech rather, is shunyata, the empty void or emptiness. And in order to make clear what's meant by shunyata, I'll just read you a short quote from Alan Watts again. So you may ask then, well, what is this all about? If there are deeds but no doer, if there's experiencing but no experiencer, then what is reality? What is life? After all, we always thought we knew what pattern was by contrast with stuff, substance with form. But now if the contrast has disappeared, we are left with the deed alone, but no agent, the form alone, but no stuff. So what are we left with? This is what Buddhist philosophy calls shunyata, the empty void. It is void, not because there's nothing there, but because our mind has no idea of it. So this reiterates the point that, you know, if we're to sort of view the world as basically a ongoing flow of processes, and, you know, if we sort of are part of this huge sort of mega process that's just going on, the trick is not to have too many concepts about it, you know, and to just be, to just live. So that was this second chapter that concludes today's episode. I hope I can get you interested in this. There's as I mentioned last time, there's a lot of actual recordings of Alan Watts' talks, and I will link a couple of them in the description box. I will do so every time, you know, that there is actual recordings that are somewhat close to what we're discussing in these reviews. Okay, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.